A town that doesn't have older buildings is not a town that is very interesting to walk in. It's not a town that's very interesting to live in, and probably not a town that's very interesting to work in. The texture of a city sort of arises from these layers of history, and restoring buildings is ensuring the preservation of those layers.
This house has belonged to us since 1964, when David Rockefeller was donated the house. And for him, this was going to be the home of Latin America away from Latin America.
680 Park is the cornerstone of the Pine-Davidson Row. It's important for the organization to really maintain and restore this building to what it was intended to be. And that was our responsibility, and that was the project that we undertook.
You have this intact block of Federal Revival buildings, which is unique to New York. It's practically unique to the United States, and the level of the architecture is very, very high, and it has been preserved. Before the house was built, Park Avenue was an open pit. We had steam locomotives running down to 42nd Street to Grand Central Terminal, and it was a pretty nasty place. And then in the early 20th century, they covered over Park Avenue and electrified the trains, getting rid of the smoke and the steam. So suddenly Park Avenue became a desirable address for wealthy New Yorkers, and of which Percy Pine was certainly one.
Percy Pine was a banker and philanthropist. He was the president of City National Bank. And in 1906, he commissioned 680 Park to McKim, Mead & White. The building was ultimately completed in 1912.
Beyond the fact that it's a New York city landmark and it's a federal landmark, it's very significant for having been saved from the wrecking ball and repurposed.
In 1947, the family moved out of the residence, and the building was put up for sale and was ultimately sold to the Russians for the Soviet mission to the United Nations.
Once the Russian government moved out and sold it, it was bought by some developers, and I think they wanted to tear it down and build a big apartment building. So they put a sidewalk bridge up around the house, and they put the dumpsters out on the street, and they, I believe, started by taking the balconies off. And the Marquesa de Cuevas lived across the street, and she saw this, and she couldn't believe her eyes. And she, because she was a Rockefeller, she was able to make some phone calls that were answered and was able to act very quickly and stopped this demolition and destruction of the house.
And she purchased the property and then ultimately donated it to the American Society and to David Rockefeller. Demolition had begun for about approximately 10 days when it was stopped.
And since the time that the Americas Society and its predecessor organizations have owned this house, we have seen people walking through this house with David's vision of it being the place where you bring Latin Americans and Americans together.
Good morning. Hey, David. Okay, so I'm saying some things that you need to hear.
Over the years, we engaged in a bunch of projects for this building, and we took them piece by piece in amounts that we could afford to accomplish. In 2012, we really did a full building conditions report. We met Ivan Brice, and we then came up with a plan to restore the building from bottom to top.
The first step is to prepare base plans that accurately represent the building. And as there were no digital plans of the building, we prepared on the AutoCAD program digital plans. The New York Historical Society had quite a few of the original McKean and White drawings, and we, through that process, we were able to identify missing elements on the building and able to ultimately replicate the design. All was subject to the scrutiny, close scrutiny, and approval of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. Many of the details were uncovered during construction, and we had to, at a very fast pace, come up with details that would improve upon some of those, especially to ensure the watertightness of the building. The stonework on the building was extremely deteriorated at the cornice level. And there you have modillion brackets that project out and support the slabs, the marble slabs above. In between the modillions, you have rosettes that are these beautiful, flower elements. When it came to replacing the windows and cataloging them and measuring them, we were surprised to find that there were 23 different types on this one building. We replicated both the millwork as far as the mutton bars and the brick molds, and the size on the first two of the floors is very unusual. We had to find a manufacturer that could reliably build these windows that are as much as 11 feet tall. The portico on this building may be the only portico on Park Avenue at the present moment, if not originally. There are many canopies projecting out on the street, but we have here a large stone stoop with two Ionic columns and then pilasters that have Ionic capitals above them, and it's very elegant and a very beautiful design. And above that, entablature on the front of the building, a rectangular shield that has a very unique decorative design on it. There are what are called dentils at the cornice of the portico, and there are also larger bracket elements called modillions. All of those elements were eroded severely and had to be repaired with mortars and artisan carving on site. Directly above the portico is a wreath element, which is, I believe, the most prominent ornament on the whole building. And that wreath was almost illegible in the edges of the floral elements there. And so that was totally restored and is really looking perfectly like the original now.
This was a very special project for us and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We were very fortunate to get funding from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and other private funding, and we were able to complete the project pretty close to our original budget. We were so fortunate to be able to assemble a team dedicated to this project, starting with a great architect and a dedicated team of consultants, contractors, artisans, and craftsmen, all who are so dedicated to getting this project done. All of us that worked on this project are so proud of our contributions and proud of what we're going to leave behind.
I think the best way to preserve historical buildings is to use them. A used building is a loved building, so the fact that this building has been beautifully restored and actively used is as good as it gets.
Having a conversation doesn't mean we always agree, but the ability to sit down in a place like 680 Park Avenue with its amazing history and its relationship with Latin America is so important to that process.